I know some of you don't know what I do, but I make video installation, I'm doing some painting right now, I do drawings and sculpture, I write, not always about art, and I never write specifically. I don't think I've ever written about an artwork necessarily, because I'm not an art historian. I'm also not a philosopher, but I do like to use philosophy in all my work. So I'm a kind of armchair philosopher to some degree. But I was interested in how art could have agency in a context of what we call pluralism. So first I'll just tell you what I mean by agency, and then, before that I think I'll tell you what I mean by pluralism. There's other words I could use, but I'm just using that for the sake of it, right? So by pluralism, I generally mean that thing that we all are pretty aware of by now, which is the condition that God is dead, that we cannot conceive a categorical ethics upon which to plan our action. There's no strong conception of good or evil as absolutes, and even there's no conception of like total governments from which we could pose a political opposition to in the context of like global financial, like corporate power. So there's no natural bonds also that we can call upon to say that we should be a community. So this is a picture of a world that is indifferent to us. It's a materialist world where the human is not the central axis of the dimensions of time and space. There is no God-given ground or absolute authority that governs the way we behave and establishes the values that we have. When I talk about the word agency, I'm referring to how thoughts and actions affect change, how we might think of the question of authority, decision, projects, aims, horizons, and goals in the face of this picture of the plural or the groundless or the non-given, right? So here we have a question about how we can make decisions without ground, how our ideas of ourselves in action affecting change in the face of this complex of the real seem to be complicated and often disavowed, because we often think that in order to do something we need a strong place to start, a foundation, an anchor, right? But when there are no anchors and no foundations, it becomes very complicated about how we might conceive or perceive of making things different, right? So how do we make things different? I've spent a long time being interested in these ideas, which are materialism, non-humanism, rationalism, and realism. And they're all kind of bundled up in loads of different ideas. They're very specific and different, but they've all come into my practice at some point. And part of that is this idea that I've tried to think of a non-human-centered world where the self is not a mirror of the real, as I've just been describing. And how when the self is seen as a mirror of the real, we often get these art practices that claim that they're picturing the ineffable or the unknown. So artwork holds this space of life beyond reason, and yet I'm looking at it and I can talk about it. Whoa, this is weird. So have I entered the space beyond reason because I'm looking at an artwork? I don't think so. I can kind of think about that stuff I see in an art gallery. It doesn't make me kind of cry or go into crisis or there's a catastrophe because I don't know how to talk about it. In 2008, I was commissioned to make a public artwork in England. In the Second World War, London was bombed a lot, and there were parts of London that were bombed, kind of annihilated, and people had to leave. There was nowhere to go. And at the same time, in post-war Britain, there was this optimism for a new way of life, a utopian socialism. And there were these things that were built called new towns, and one of them was Milton Keynes, and another one, there was a few, but another one was Harlow, and these were outside London. And the idea was that an architect would invent a town out of nature. There was nature, and then there was a town. And these would be perfect spaces for communities. They would be socialist in principle, modernist in design, brutalist in aesthetic, right? So it was a town built with brutalist communal architecture. There were more artworks commissioned for the inauguration of the town than any other town ever before or since. So we were really sceptical, and there was a bunch of us who worked together. And what we decided to do, rather than do a public, participatory, involved artwork with the community, we decided to give them one thing they hadn't got, which is an institution, a gallery. So we kind of did a very, a governmental institutional move. Me and two other artists, Roman Vasseur and Diane Bauer, made the Harlow Temple of Utopias here and painted a mural around it, which had images of the architects' buildings kind of in this apocalyptic, wild landscape. I made a video, and whilst I was making the video, I spoke to Roman and Diane a lot, and we kind of just talked about our problems and images of Harlow. I'm making 2D work. So this is called The Head is Nothing Without the Body, and they're kind of they're photographs of Daniel Buren's socialist sculpture that I've made into these tricky op art they kind of mess with your head a bit, and they've got these socialist slogans, these Hegelianisms that Buren would like, but they're kind of messed up in the work. And that's just a kind of, they're like collages, but in print. And then this is an exhibition that I did in Belfast last year, and I made these, you can't really see on the slide, it's really weird, but I've been doing these burnt pieces where I burn out slogans. I'm really interested in graphology and typography and institutional aesthetics. And I've been kind of making up institutions, I guess, and companies. And these are companies that I've showing you that don't exist.